April 7, 1994, a date etched in infamy. A single broadcast ignited one of the most horrifying large-scale elimination of people in human history. What happened in Rwanda during those 100 days of horror will shake you to your core. From propaganda to mass life-taking, this is the genocide so evil it'll leave you shaken. Stay tuned as we uncover the chilling truth. Rwanda's history is deeply entwined with colonialism. From 1885 to 1919, Germany claimed the region as part of its empire, only for Belgium to take over until 1961. These colonial powers left a lasting imprint on Rwanda and its neighbors, particularly Burundi, which also housed significant Hutu and Tutsi populations. Colonial ideologies, underpinned by notions of racial hierarchy, fueled existing ethnic tensions. Europeans, viewing themselves as inherently superior to Africans, introduced divisive policies that exacerbated these tensions. The Hutu and Tutsi, along with the indigenous TWA Pygmy group, had coexisted in the region for centuries, forming kingdoms by the 16th century. However, disputes over power and resources frequently sparked war, a pattern mirrored across East Africa. Neighboring Uganda and Burundi experienced similar strife, with Burundi witnessing catastrophic ethnic violence in 1972 and 1993. Colonial rule temporarily suppressed large-scale conflicts to safeguard economic interests, but it also entrenched damaging ideologies. The Belgian administration, influenced by the pseudoscience of eugenics popular in the early 20th century, institutionalized a hierarchy that placed the Tutsi above the Hutu and TWA. Eugenics, which sought to categorize humans into superior and inferior groups, was embraced across Europe and North America. Its proponents believed societal progress depended on empowering superior groups while marginalizing others. In Rwanda, these theories were weaponized. The Tutsi, perceived as taller and more Caucasian in appearance, were deemed superior and granted preferential treatment. They occupied positions of authority in government, policing, and the military, often at the expense of the Hutu majority. Belgian policies perpetuated this imbalance, allocating land and resources predominantly to the Tutsi. Over time, many Tutsi internalized these beliefs, as the narrative of their supposed superiority was reinforced through education and media. By the 1990s, Rwanda's demographic makeup underscored the divide. Tutsi constituted about 15% of the population, while the Hutu comprised approximately 84%, and the TWA, a marginalized 1 to 2%. With nearly 8 million people living in Rwanda in 1993, these divisions fueled resentment and set the stage for the horrific events of 1994. For Tutsi children, whose understanding of the world was shaped by the Belgian-administered education system, the socio-economic reality reinforced their sense of superiority. The best jobs, the most power, and the highest incomes predominantly belonged to their ethnic group, affirming what they had been taught. Under colonial rule, Rwandans were issued identification cards categorizing them by ethnicity, which dictated access to education, employment, and privileges. These IDs were necessary because, in many cases, visual distinctions between ethnic groups were not obvious, illustrating the dubious nature of the colonial classifications. Over time, these policies fueled resentment among the Hutu majority. From 1945 to 1961, Rwanda was designated a United Nations Trust Territory, nominally overseen by the UN but administered by Belgium. The intention was to prepare Rwanda for independence within 15 years. However, by the late 1950s, anti-colonial movements were surging across Africa, driven by discontent with European control and inspired by global discussions on liberty and self-determination following World War II. While these ideals were touted by Western powers, many Africans felt excluded from them. Rwanda, with its small size and ethnically divided population, remained under firm Belgian control, exacerbating tensions between the Tutsi and Hutu. The Hutu, fearing retribution from the Tutsi after Belgian withdrawal, overthrew the last Tutsi king, Kijili V, in 1959. His monarchy, which had roots tracing back to the 18th century, had been bolstered by both German and Belgian colonial authorities. His ousting marked the beginning of instability that persisted even after Rwanda's independence in 1961, when a Hutu president was elected. By 1963, ethnic violence erupted again, leading to the massacre of approximately 130,000 Tutsi, including many politicians, following unfounded rumors of a Hutu leader's life-taking. This period solidified the rise of Hutu power, a movement that rejected Tutsi dominance and drew inspiration from anti-colonial literature celebrating African civilizations and Hutu heritage. Hutu power's narrative claimed that the Hutu were the region's original settlers and that the Tutsi were later invaders. This rhetoric marginalized the TWA, an indigenous group who had lived semi-nomadic lives in Rwanda's forests for centuries. The Hutu power ideology gained momentum through the 1970s and 1980s. Although many Hutu, particularly in Kigali, sought peaceful coexistence with the Tutsi. In 1988, the Rwandan Patriotic Front, RPF, was formed by Tutsi exiles and their descendants who had fled Rwanda in the 1960s. With backing from neighboring countries, the RPF launched a civil war against the Hutu-led government of Juvenal Habyarimana, who had come to power in a 1973 coup. Initially, Habyarimana was seen as a potential mediator, as he resisted extreme policies championed by Hutu militants. However, his regime grew increasingly autocratic and leaned toward favoring Hutu dominance, though not to the extent demanded by hardliners. Rwanda's economic struggles exacerbated tensions. The global coffee price collapse in 1989 devastated the nation, plunging many into deeper poverty. Hutu militants capitalized on the economic despair, blaming the government, Tutsi elites, and former colonial powers for the worsening conditions. By 1990, the RPF advanced from multiple fronts, escalating the conflict. In 1992, peace negotiations between Habyarimana's government and the RPF led to a tentative agreement for power sharing. After 2 years of intense conflict and negotiations, the Arusha Accords were finally established. This agreement, named after the Tanzanian town where the talks occurred, aimed to create a framework for an inclusive government in Rwanda, granting equal opportunities regardless of ethnicity. However, just 9 months later, the fragile peace unraveled. Rwandan President Juvenal Habyarimana, along with the President of Burundi and Rwanda's Army Chief of Staff, was unalived when their plane was fired down near Kigali. The blame for the life-taking was scattered across factions. The Rwandan Patriotic Front, RPF, led by Paul Kagame, radical Hutu factions enraged by Habyarimana's concessions, and even European entities accused of covert interference. While the true perpetrators remained unknown for years, French investigations in 2006 and 2012 pointed fingers at Kagame, a claim he and the RPF consistently denied. That fateful night, Radio Television Libre de Mille Collines, RTLM, notorious for its incendiary broadcasts, called upon the Hutu population to cut down the tall trees and crush the cockroaches, euphemisms for eliminating the Tutsi. This rhetoric had been escalating for nearly 2 years, bolstered by propaganda-laden music and vitriolic speeches labeling the Tutsi as devious and dangerous. By 1993, RTLM was openly advocating for genocide, earning the grim moniker Radio Genocide. The elimination of Habyarimana ignited a well-coordinated massacre that began in Kigali on April 7, 1994. Hutu militias, including the Interahamwe and Impuzamugambi, initiated mass life-taking of Tutsi civilians and moderate Hutu who supported power-sharing agreements. Armed with sharp objects, clubs, and crude weapons symbolized on their flags, these groups carried out systematic atrocities, often under the direction of Habyarimana's inner circle, the Akazu, who envisioned a zero Tutsi Rwanda. The war spread rapidly. On April 8th, the life-taking engulfed rural areas, with militias storming Tutsi villages while chanting war songs. Even moderate Hutu were coerced into participating. Those who resisted faced punishment or death at the hands of extremists. In the following days, mass elimination unfolded in places of supposed refuge. At the Polish Mission Church in Shikondo, over 100 Tutsi were unalived. A similar tragedy occurred at the Nairobi Catholic Church on April 15th and 16th, where thousands were unalived after being herded onto the grounds. Many subjected to public mockery before being unalived. Survivors, often few in number, feigned death to escape. In Kibai, western Rwanda, the local stadium became a site of mass life-taking, with 12,000 Tutsi eliminated. Tens of thousands more were unalived in the surrounding hills, and their bodies were dumped into Lake Kivu, polluting the water shared with neighboring Congo. In northern Rwanda, thousands of corpses were discarded into the Kagera River, which flows into Lake Victoria, forcing border nations to halt water usage due to contamination fears. The large life-taking scale was unprecedented. By the time international awareness grew, atrocities had claimed the lives of an estimated 500,000 to 800,000 people, including many TWA, an indigenous group long marginalized by both Hutu and Tutsi. Films like Hotel Rwanda later depicted the horrors, capturing the global audience's attention. On April 28th to 29th, approximately 250,000 Tutsi managed to flee Rwanda, primarily seeking refuge in Tanzania. Yet, by then, the majority of victims were already dead. As the large-scale elimination continued, the Rwandan Patriotic Front advanced, capitalizing on the disarray within the Rwandan army. By May, they had seized Kigali's presidential palace and steadily took control of the country. This led to retaliatory life-taking by Tutsi militias, compounding the tragedy. By mid-July, the RPF declared its intention to uphold the Arusha Accords, promising a government based on power sharing. Global intervention came too late. In July, French troops arrived, establishing a safe zone in southwestern Rwanda. However, confusion over which group required protection, Hutu or surviving Tutsi, underscored the lack of preparedness. The United Nations, the United States, and European powers faced harsh criticism for their delayed and inadequate responses to one of the 20th century's most devastating large-scale life-taking. The Rwandan genocide is a haunting reminder of what unchecked hatred, propaganda, and division can lead to. Hundreds of thousands of lives were lost, and the scars remain etched in history. What lessons do you think the world has learned or still needs to learn from this tragedy? Share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more stories that unveil humanity's darkest moments.